Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast, your place for all your filthy casual takes on the world of sports for you filthy casual sports fans out there like you and me. I am your host, Dylan Lasagna. This is episode number 254, and in this episode, we begin the annual tradition that is NFL Season Recap Month, because the NFL offseason is underway, and now it's the time to look back at the season that was the 2024 NFL season specifically, and look back at how all 31 teams did or didn't do this past year. Now, you're probably wondering, why 31? Because there's 32 teams in the National Football League, Dylan. Well, that's because we already talked about one team, and that was my team, the San Francisco 49ers. We already talked about them in one of the podcast episodes in the last month, so go check that out after this one. So we're here to talk about, in the next several weeks here on Very Cold Lasagna, the other 31 teams and how they did or didn't do here in NFL Season Recap Month, only here on Very Cold Lasagna in the most filthy casual way possible. So we'll break down what exactly is NFL Season Team Recap Month for those of you new here on Very Cold Lasagna. But before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping before we get the ball rolling. Make sure you follow Very Cold Lasagna on social media, on Twitter or Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. For all my audio listeners out there, continue to listen to the podcast wherever you get them, whether it's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you watching on YouTube, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button if you're not subscribed already, which you should, by the way. Turn on that notification bell. Leave your comments down below on the first part of our 2024 NFL season team recaps, which is the topic at hand. We're going to be talking about the first set of teams in this episode. We'll discuss what those teams are exactly. So leave your comments down below, and the timestamps will also be in the description, but I encourage you all to listen to the full episode of this podcast. And as always, share this with your friends, share this with your neighbors, share this with a stranger, share this with your colleagues, whether it's at work or school. Share the good, the bad, the ugly about this filthy casual podcast for all fans alike. Very Cold Lasagna. So that being said, let's talk about what exactly is NFL Season Team Recap Month here on Very Cold Lasagna. So for the last, I'd say, couple of years here on Very Cold Lasagna, I'd say we started this thing back in 2022, the year after I started doing this show. We decided to do a little thing called Season Team Recap Month, where we talk about all 31 teams in the NFL, because, you know, I always leave my 49ers to a special, dedicated episode because, duh, it's my team, and I can do whatever I want here on this show. But that's besides the point. So when it comes to NFL Season Team Recap Month, for those of you new to the show that are listening to the very first time, this is exactly how we do it. So these episodes dedicated to Season Team Recap Month, they're divided up into, I'd say, about 5 to 6 episodes, kind of like how last year was, the year prior, and the very first edition back 2 to 3 years ago. So they're divided up into 5 to 6 episodes, and that goes on throughout the month of March. So in each episode, we talk about 6 teams each per episode. Sometimes it's 5, depending on, you know, how things shape up, whether it's we get down to the nitty gritty, like let's say the last episode, when we get down to the final 5 teams that made it all the way to the conference championship and the Super Bowl. For example, I'm just saying. So in these episodes, we talk about what went right, what went wrong, pretty much, you know, all the good, juicy stuff that all the filthy casuals want to hear about all 31 teams in this past season, specifically 2024. You know, whether you're a Titans fan or a Raiders fan or an Eagles fan, for example, when we get to them eventually towards the end of next month. But anyway, we look at all those things. We look at how they're doing in the offseason, especially when we get towards free agency in a couple of weeks. we look at how I personally feel about each of these teams and what they need to do and try how to, try and get better, how to have a better 2025 next fall. And like I said, how as we get into the later half of these season recaps, I'd say about the halfway point, we will focus more on what these teams have done already in terms of free agency, like big moves, like big trades, like if they made a jump up the draft board, and we'll adjust their needs heading into probably the second most important time of the offseason, which is the NFL draft. So, yeah, that being said, this is a pretty, I'd say it's a pretty, despite it being a downtime during the NFL, for all the NFL fans out there, for those of you still wanting to engage in some NFL content, well, this is a place for you. Whether you're a filthy casual, a hardcore, this is the place for it. So, that being said, we're going to dive deep into the first part of another edition of NFL Season Recap Month in the most filthy casual way we can here on Very Cold Lasagna, starting with part one. A part one where we always dive into the worst of the worst. Who made the filthy casual terrible six? Who made it back into dumpster town? Well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out who was the top six in this year's NFL draft, but more importantly, who was this year's dishonorable six in this first part of Very Cold Lasagna's NFL Season Team Recap Month. So strap in, buckle up, and enjoy the ride as we begin 2024 NFL Season Team Recap Month here on Very Cold Lasagna. The very first team that we're going to be talking about in our 2024 NFL Season Team Recap Month and our season team recaps as a whole is the very first dishonorable team and the holder of the number one overall pick in the upcoming NFL draft. And that team belongs in Nashville, the Tennessee Titans. Not a lot of expectations for this team this past season because, well, last year at this point of time, they underwent a significant change that saw the departures of Ryan Tannehill, their stud running back Derrick Henry, and they also let go their previous head coach, Mike Vrabel. And they replaced Mike Vrabel with former Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. Brian Callahan was tasked in spearheading year one of what at least should have felt like their proper true rebuild. So when you look at last offseason for the Tennessee Titans, they made significant changes to both sides of the ball, addressing the offensive line, the secondary, most notably trading for corner L'Jarius Sneed from the Kansas City Chiefs, a Chiefs team that was coming off a Super Bowl win. So when you look at that secondary for the Titans, you're at least getting some kind of championship experience coming in right away that could help a Titans defense that was pretty much struggling in 2023. But when you look at the other side of the coin for the Titans, you're kind of wondering what were they going to do with the quarterback position, because you're going into year two with Will Levis, who had a little bit of promise, but he was still going to be competing for the starting job with Mason Rudolph, and also there was another quarterback, but they also they traded him away during the offseason. So it was pretty much his job to have, and he ended up winning that job. But still, a lot of questions about whether Will Levis can be that guy to lead the Titans and pretty much lock down that long-term starting job in Tennessee. So looking at this past season for the Tennessee Titans, unfortunately, that didn't end up being the case because the quarterback play, it was pretty bad for the Titans. Whether it was Will Levis or Mason Rudolph, the offense, it really couldn't take care of the football because, especially Will Levis, he was a turnover machine. He would often throw it wide open to the opposing team, and both him and Mason Rudolph would account for a bunch of lost fumbles, So basically, in essence, in a nutshell, they would lead the NFL in turnovers. At one point, you'd have Will Levis get benched mid-game for Mason Rudolph. And there was also a point, though, in fairness, Levis was playing through an injury, and he ended up coming back later in the season, but didn't really make much of a difference. He was still playing. He played a little bit better, I suppose, but still not enough to help the Titans win games. But at that point in the year, they really didn't need to. So meanwhile, staying on the offensive side of the ball, you look at the offensive line. And when I did my season preview of the Titans back in July of last year, I thought the offensive line supposedly improved in the offseason. But when you look at how they played this past year, this unit really struggled. It really struggled to protect either quarterback, whether it was Levis or Rudolph. So instead of improving on paper, they instead let them get sacked a whopping 52 times. And the offensive line was also responsible for getting Will Levis injured and letting him get miss a couple of games during the season. So the offense heavily struggled in this past season, notably at quarterback. So at least they found out that, well, neither Rudolph nor Levis especially weren't the answer. So what did go right for the Tennessee Titans this past season? In a year where things were really down, even though expectations, there weren't really many. So was there anything to really take your head up high for the powder blue people over there? Well, there were at least a little bit. There were at least a little bit of positive things down in Tennessee, like the receiving game. There was some receiving help for the Titans, like Calvin Ridley and Nick Westbrook-Akine. They kept the passing game afloat. So at least when you look at from a coaching perspective with Brian Callahan, he at least knows going to next fall, he at least has two receiving options for his next quarterback, whoever that's going to be. Ridley, he did pretty well, but especially late in the season with Nick Westbrook-Akine, he did especially well with his route running, knowing the point of the catch. Pretty reliable target for Will Levis, despite his inconsistent play. So overall, these two guys, I'd say they are two keepers that are going to be good for the next quarterback. And then the passing defense, it was actually pretty good, despite extra iffy pass rush. The corner duo of Chidobe Awuzie and L'Jarius Sneed, pretty productive in lockdown coverage. And then in the deep end of the defense, safety Amani Hooker, he was the best of the bunch. He had 5 interceptions in the season. And even though, like I said, the pass rush was so-so, the secondary was pretty good. So the Titans ended their season at 3-14. Even though they didn't completely suck, they didn't get their asses whooped most of the time. They also didn't show enough promise in the first year of their rebuild. Their aggressive spending, they had all that money to spend last offseason, but it didn't translate to the field enough. And it was showing a lot. So that led to Ron Kaflon, their former GM, getting fired after 2 seasons, and they had to shed about $67 million in dead cap in the last month. So they do all that. They replaced Ron Kaflon with former Chiefs Assistant General Manager Mike Borgonzi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, by the way. So Mike Borgonzi and Brian Callahan, they now have the tall task of starting up a true rebuild. Hopefully this time they do it right. And that begins with, well, what do you do in the draft? Because by the worst team in the NFL, that rewards you with the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. I mean, it's the obvious move, but is it the move that the Titans are going to make? So as the offseason is underway, we look ahead to, well, what are the Titans going to do? They have about $49 million in cap space to spend. So they have, I say, a decent amount of money. It's better than, the teams below them. So, like I said, they have the number 1 overall pick. The fate of the draft is in their hands, especially with the teams below them. So looking at some of the key free agents, they have Tyler Boyd and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. They have to make a decision, especially with Westbrook-Ikhine. Maybe they should also consider re-signing Tyler Boyd. Quandre Diggs at safety, defensive tackle Sebastian Joseph Day. Keep in mind, with some of these key free agents, these are just some of my personal key targets that all these teams, including the Titans, should consider re-signing or moving on from. So looking at the main team needs that the Titans should address this offseason, obviously the number one need before anything else is the quarterback position. Again, with sucking so much this past 2024, they earned themselves the top pick in this draft. But with the scouting combine coming up, pro days, are these top quarterback prospects, is this draft class going to be good enough for Tennessee to be impressed by any of them? That's the major question. Now, of course, you also have to go and get a veteran as well, in the event that whatever you get at number one gets injured or they underperform. You also have to have a veteran insurance policy. So once you figure out who's going to be your quarterback, now you have to build around it. And that also translates to that offensive line. The interior offensive line was pretty bad this past season, specifically at center and guard. You have to think about starting guard Dylan Raduns and center Corey Levin. They're going into free agency, but they can be replaced anyway. So readdressing that interior offensive line is a must for their new QB. You can also get a new starting receiver as well. They can re-sign Tyler Boyd. They should seriously re-sign Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. But even if you re-sign either one of those guys, you can't expect Westbrook-Ikhine, Calvin Ridley to be their only starting receivers. Go and get another one. Doesn't hurt to have as many weapons as possible, especially for a new quarterback. So overall, I say the Titans have a lot of work to do if they want to get back to a respectable level, especially in a weak AFC South where I feel like anybody can win it. Even though the Texans are still right there in the thick of things, they're always going to be at the top. But the Titans, you never know. They have to first make a decision on what quarterback they want to take in April's draft. And once they see who that is in the combine and at pro days, they can then get pieces for him in free agency before regrouping before April, like late in March, to go and get their man. Who will be that man for the Titans once April rolls around? Well, that's only for Tennessee to figure out and decide. Moving on from Nashville, we go up north to, oh man, it smells like a damn toilet because we're going back up north to visit the skid marks. Oh, sorry, the Cleveland Browns. The skid marks are back, baby. Yeah, the skid marks are forever back until further notice, because the skid marks went to this past season with the tall task of, again, hoping that Deshaun Watson could find some semblance of his past self. After, the season before, in 2023, saw the skid marks get into the playoffs with Joe Flacco. We all thought it was going to be Deshaun Watson leading them into the playoffs, but no. They had that weird quarterback carousel that ended with Joe Flacco getting to the playoffs into a wildcard game with the Houston Texans, and it was a close game, but then they proceeded to get their butts whooped in the end by those Texans. So there was a little bit of hope. There was some hope in the land of the skid marks that they could make another crack at the playoffs. So looking back at the offseason last year for the Cleveland Browns, they really couldn't do anything other than add multiple QBs in the event that Deshaun Watson, once again, was lost to injury, like Jameis Winston, Tyler Huntley. Yeah, pretty much that's all they could do. Like, they replaced Joe Flacco with those two guys. They didn't have a lot of cap space because of that big fat contract that Watson has. Not a lot of draft picks either. So not a whole lot of things that the Browns could do this past season. But nonetheless, they still had those hopes and dreams. And they also had a SummerSlam too, mind you, where they saw the Kiss seen around the world and the return of the OTC before their season started. So again, hope, even if it was delusional for the skid marks. So that's what the Browns had. And they were hoping that Deshaun Watson would find a little bit of semblance of his past self to lead the Browns into at least, at minimum, a playoff berth. But unfortunately, once again, that wasn't the case. That was not the case. He really underperformed once again. He looked flustered under pressure for multiple weeks. He wasn't able to read defenses. He threw off target a lot. But this past season came with the worst of the worst scenarios, because that came in week 7 against the Cincinnati Bengals in a division game at home when I think it was a second down play early in the second quarter of that game where he managed to find an open lane to run, and he got a first down and he got more, but he awkwardly went down, and that was because probably the worst news that regardless of whether if you hate the man or not, he tore his Achilles on the run. Ouch. Just ouch. Now, it wasn't much of a major blow because to the skid marks offense, and not much of a major blow to his morale because, well, at this point, pretty much everyone hates on Deshaun Watson. But regardless, again, how you feel about him, it's an essential death nail to Deshaun Watson as a starting quarterback, because not only had he failed to recapture any semblance of his past self, but he suffered another season-ending injury. Remember, I believe it was in his first year in Cleveland. His first year, like actually starting in Cleveland, which was the year prior, he tore his shoulder. And then now, a year later, it's even worse. He tore his Achilles. And then what's even worse, he tore that same Achilles while he was supposed to be rehabbing 2 months later. So, in the grand scheme of things, if you're the skid marks, this trade for Watson, giving up all those assets to go and get him, that trade, back in 2021 when we started this damn thing, it was like one of the very first podcast episodes, extras that we did on the Sean Watson drama. Yeah, it's a bust. It's an absolute bust. Like, there are absolutely terrible trades in the NFL in history. This go down, in my opinion. From the ones I've seen, this is the absolute worst. Like, the Browns, they've traded all those assets to the Texans, and in return, they get an absolute shell of a quarterback. That was terrible. Like, this is absolutely terrible for the Browns. But, well, let's be honest, it's kind of deserved. It's kind of deserved on them. And then what followed was the not so surprising bad quarterback play. I mean, given that you have a quarterback room of Jameis Winston, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and Bailey Zappi. So, yeah, a bunch of backup quarterbacks. Now, in fairness, Jameis Winston actually started out pretty well. He got a big upset win over the Baltimore Ravens the week after Watson's injury, which surprised me too. And my delusional ass thought, Winston, he might be all right. He might be all right for the skid marks. But other than, leading the Browns to another divisional upset over the Steelers like a month later in the snow, it wasn't no surprise that he went back to being famous Jameis for the other games that he started. And, well, yeah, it was no surprise that he ended up getting benched later on in the season. So overall, an absolute mess for the skid marks when you look at this past season, especially when it comes to the quarterback room. Again, not really much of a surprise. So, look, of course, you don't want to be too negative on this team and you don't want to poke too much fun, even though it's deserved. So, did anything go right for the Browns other than having a SummerSlam this like a month before the season? Well, I mean, Jerry Jeudy was had a pretty good season after being traded from Denver last offseason. Even though he started off slow because of Watson's poor play, he would still end the season posting his best career year, even with the rotation of quarterbacks. He would make his first ever Pro Bowl, also becoming the top option, well, by default because, well, the Browns traded away Amari Cooper to the Bills. But nonetheless, he showed why he could be a top receiver in the NFL, finally. So having Jerry Jeudy being the top receiving option, I mean, it kind of helped the skid marks in a way. And, you know, by losing so much, by sucking so much, they also notched a top 2 draft pick. So, yeah, with all that losing came the all-elusive high draft pick. Now, whether Jimmy Haslam and Andrew Berry, the GM, are competent enough to make that right pick, that's another thing, though. So, the Browns end their season, another measly 3-14, and it's just pretty sad, you know. To go from 11-6 as a wildcard team, just their second playoff appearance in how many years as an organization, and back to the dumpster, 3-14 with a top 2 pick, and an injured quarterback with a big fat contract. Another typically terrible season for the Cleveland skid marks. So, like I said, they do have the second overall pick to get the quarterback they want in order to eventually replace Deshaun Watson, who is not likely to play at all next year because of the Achilles tear twice. But are they actually competent enough to do so? Well, time will tell once we get to the draft in April. So, looking ahead to their offseason, which, well, is in a couple weeks, they're not exactly in a great position when it comes to replenishing its roster. So, yeah, decisions have to be made, like, real soon. So, looking at the Browns offseason, they're, like, in the red. They have, like, the second least amount of cap space behind the Saints. Around $27 million at the time I'm recording this, and not very good for the Browns. And a lot of that negative money comes from that big fat contract of Deshaun Watson. Like I said, they own the second overall pick in this draft. Some of their key free agents include Nick Chubb, coming off that injury, that brutal injury from the season before in 2023. Receiver Elijah Moore, and of course Jameis Winston. So, looking at some of the things that they have to seriously address this offseason, obviously it's the quarterback spot. Now, of course, typically the answer to what do they do with that number 2 overall pick is quarterback. Now, I'm not sure if they actually do that because, well, I don't know. Like, what's the best prospect after what the Titans don't pick at number 1? I legitimately don't know. But they need to get multiple quarterbacks regardless. One in the draft, one in free agency. Just go and get multiple quarterbacks because, well, Deshaun Watson's not playing. I don't think he is at all next year because he tore his Achilles twice in 2 months, mind you. Then they have to go get some help on the offensive line because Jedrick Wilson at left tackle, he sucked in the last 2 years. So they're going to have to find his replacement in order to protect the blind side of their new quarterback. And then on the opposite side of the trenches at defensive line, they're going to need multiple defensive tackles, multiple edge rushers. So pretty much a refresh on the defensive trenches because Myles Garrett is also wanted out of Cleveland. He requested a trade. The Browns, it seems like they're going to, they initially didn't want to trade him, but it seems like they changed their tune on it recently. So it seems like Myles Garrett is going to be on the way out of Cleveland. Who knows when, but might happen eventually. So, yeah, looking really rough for the skid marks this offseason. Like, when is it never, huh? So, they have a QB that has an inescapable, big, fat contract right now. And, like I said, going to be out pretty much all of next season. At least, I mean, I'm no doctor, but that's pretty much how I see it. They have next to no money to spend in free agency. Very few draft picks. even with that number 2 overall pick, even if they get a quarterback, that quarterback's not going to have any help. So this offseason, it's going to be a real mess. A real funny mess, though, to watch for these Cleveland skid marks. As, these next couple months, and maybe this next year, it's just going to be one funny toilet swirl for the skid marks. Better get those plungers ready, pal. From one toilet bowl to the other, we move on from the skid marks to talk about the New York Giants. Not many expectations were had for the 2024 Giants, who are celebrating, in air quotes by the way, 100 seasons of existence. Yet, there currently isn't anything to celebrate for Big Blue and that side of the Meadowlands, especially everything that happened going on this past season. When you look at how they were doing at this point in time last year, General Manager Joe Chosen, he saw one of his franchise players, Saquon Barkley, that guy, who most recently won a Super Bowl with the division rival Philadelphia Eagles. He left in free agency at this point in time last year to go there to Philadelphia. He left in free agency because, he decided to sign Daniel Jones to that big fat contract over Saquon. We all remember that decision. So, Saquon leaves in free agency after playing under the franchise tag. He at least made a move in the draft to go give Daniel Jones some help, give him a top receiver in Malik Neighbors from LSU. But the problem was Daniel Jones was coming off a torn ACL from the season prior. So basically at this point, if you were the Giants, all you really want was basically at least be competitive somewhat, despite there being many clear flaws around this team, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and especially, like I said, with Daniel Jones coming off a torn ACL. And, none of those things happened. Like Daniel Jones, he did not look good throughout the first couple weeks of the season, like basically the first 2 months of the season. And he's basically back to his turnover-prone self, having at least 1 or 2 in most games by midseason. So you basically reach a point with Daniel Jones by the time they go to Germany to play the Panthers in Week 10, where he threw 2 red zone interceptions, and he ate a game-sealing sack on a flea flicker, despite having 2 wide-open receivers, and then, he eats a sack. Typical Danny Pennies. So they go on to lose that game in overtime, and that turned out to be the final straw for John Mara, the owner. So he makes a call during the bye week to the head coach, Brian Daboll. You got to bench Daniel Jones now. So, okay. Brian Daboll go benches Daniel Jones. So, it's one thing to bench Daniel Jones. But here's the other thing. Here's the other caveat for the New York Giants when all of this is happening. This whole fiasco with Daniel Jones being benched ended up being this whole publicity nightmare for all the Big Blue side, the Meadowlands, the fans of the Giants. If there's any, if there's some, but that were mad that this is happening. It was nightmarish for the Giants during this time because of what came out during these practices when they were coming off the bye week. Not only was Daniel Jones benched for Tommy DeVito, he was demoted to the 3rd string quarterback behind DeVito and Drew Lock. And Drew Lock was pissed too that he didn't even get the starting quarterback job. He was demoted to the backup position behind DeVito. So you get this whole chain reaction of quarterbacks being pissed at each other, being pissed at Brian Daboll. Like, what does that tell you about that organization right now? And then later during that week, you have these beat writers see Daniel Jones reporting that he's playing scout safety. Like, what the hell's what? What is going on? So not only is Daniel Jones not playing quarterback, but he's also playing an entirely different position. So like a day or two later, you have Daniel Jones asking and granting his release. I mean, obviously, it's the sensible move to ask for a fresh start, which makes sense considering that dumpster fire of an organization. Like, what an absolute mess. Like, an absolute mess for the Giants to just even get to that point. Like again, it's one thing to bench your quarterback, but to demote him to third string and then have him play scout safety, like a position that he doesn't even like play at all, has no experience in doing. Why? Like what are we doing? What are the Giants doing? So here they are. Like the decision to choose Daniel Jones over Saquon 2 offseasons ago. And here they are now. They're left with neither of them. And Saquon, well, they're staring a hole at him right now because, well, he's got the one thing that the Giants don't have. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then it gets even worse for the Giants because they still are losing pretty badly after their bye week, after getting rid of Daniel Jones. And obviously, the tank job is on now for the Giants. But they can't even do that right because by the time you get towards the end of the season, all they have to do is lose to the Colts, who are still in a position to at least try to get that 7th seed in the playoff hunt with Denver, Cincinnati, all those teams. But then for some weird reason, Brian Dable's like, no, we're going to pull a Lovie Smith here for some reason. It was either Brian Dable or Drew Lock that decided to pull Lovie Smith. They decided to fuck around and oust the Colts in blowout fashion, mind you, and oust them from playoff contention in their last home game of the season in week 17. But as consequence, as punishment for that, they fucked over their own chances of inching closer to the number 1 pick in the draft. Like they were right there in the thick of getting the number 1 pick in the draft. One where they absolutely need a new long-term quarterback. Like, what are they not getting? What are they not understanding about wanting a quarterback? Like, do they want someone that plays safety? Do they want an offensive lineman, a pass rusher that they want them to play quarterback instead? What's wrong with this organization? Like, seriously. So, I don't know, man. This is a sad, strange side of the Meadowlands. And we haven't even touched the other side of the Meadowlands yet, but we'll get that to that in whichever episode that side of the Meadowlands is on. So, did anything go right for this hot dumpster fire of the blue side of the organization? Well, there was at least something. There was at least something positive for the New York Giants. And that was their defense. There were some bright spots for a defense that sure got torched, but there was some bright spots like Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence in that pass rush. Dexter Lawrence especially, he was the lone other than Brian Burns. He had some very nice moments, especially in that game against the Seahawks where that pass rush completely obliterated Geno Smith. They bullied him with 7 sacks, but Lawrence, he had his career best game with 3 sacks in a game. And that game against the Seahawks, that ended up being the key for the Rams to eventually end up winning the division at the end of the year. But sadly, Dexter's season ended like a month later, but still finished the season with a career best 9 sacks and his 3rd Pro Bowl. So that's something there, I guess. Linebacker Bobby Okereke and safety Tyler Nubin were really productive too, despite trying to salvage a sinking secondary. And then with their rookie receiver Malik Neighbors, despite terrible quarterback play, he still lived up to the hype of being a top 5 pick in the draft, despite being given still making the most of what's given to him, like his breakout Week 2 game against Washington, and then his performance against the Colts to eliminate them. So there were some bright spots with this team. Not many, but, something that if they're competent enough, the Giants can build upon. So just like with the other two teams we talked about, they tied with the Titans and the Skid Marks with a 3-14 record. Unfortunately for the Giants, well, they won those stupid games to lock themselves with the 3rd overall pick. But the Giants, as I believe before the season started, were going to have the remorse of giving Daniel Jones this big fat contract. And look where they are now. No Jones, no Saquon, and Saquon is laughing in their face with the Super Bowl ring on a division rival, mind you. These Giants are an absolute mess right now, and well, for the foreseeable future, they're gonna have to figure out fast on trying to convince their fan base that they can right this ship, especially John Mara, the GM, the head coach, pretty much everyone in this team, that they can convince that they can right the ship. But hey, you're getting the first ever 2-night SummerSlam right in August. So, I mean, at least got something in the big blue side of the Meadowlands. So you're at least getting something with no star power in the WWE, right? Right? Yeah, that's pretty much how it is right now. So looking ahead to this offseason for the New York Giants, if you're competent enough, you can at least try to fix this. You have about $47 million in cap space. You got the 3rd overall pick. Maybe you can try to do something with it. Looking at some of the key free agents, you got Darius Slayton at receiver. You have some decisions to make on the defensive side of the ball, like edge rusher Azeez Al-Julari, linebacker Isaiah Simmons. So you have to decide whether or not you want to keep them around. I thought they were pretty decent players on that side of the ball, but again, you gotta make some decisions over there. So the biggest things that the Giants have to address this offseason, because it's pretty big for them, obviously it's the quarterback spot, because they got rid of Daniel Jones and the current depth on that spot is not there. It's not Drew Lock, okay? It's not Tommy DeVito, okay? Because right now, as it stands, this is the most obvious need that the Giants gotta get. And I'm not sure if they can get it in the draft, because the Titans and the Skid Marks are ahead of them. And, well, the Giants could have gotten their guy, but they decided to go fuck around and beat the Colts. So, yeah, again, we have to wonder, is there a quarterback worth taking that the Titans and the Skid Marks haven't taken by that point? We'll see. If not, they got to go get one in free agency, if there's a good one out there. And then the offensive line. I just don't get the idea of not wanting to protect your quarterback. I seriously don't. And this includes the Giants. Like Joe Chosen, Brian Daboll, John Mara. Stop digging around. Stop digging around and actually build a competent offensive line, especially in the interior, if their next quarterback wants to stay alive for at least half a season. This is why Daniel Jones, his ass got hurt in 2023 with the torn ACL, and this is why his ass probably got frustrated with y'all, because, well, he couldn't get protected. I was surprised he survived the years prior. So the offensive line has to be a serious priority too. Receiver, Malik Neighbors, very good receiver, but he has to get help as well on the other side of the ball, especially if they're going to be getting a new quarterback. And then a running back, Tyrone Tracy was actually another small hidden gem last season, but behind him, not much else. So the Giants, they have to keep looking at the running back spot, especially if Tyrone Tracy underperforms next season. So as we keep saying over and over and over again with this team, they're in absolute shambles right now. But if they can finally wake up on that big blue side of the Meadowlands, they can take at least baby steps. They're not going to take big steps because, well, this team is an absolute mess right now. But if John Mara, Brian Daboll, and Joe Chosen can take these necessary steps to fix this team, I feel like, there can be some progress made next fall. That's if, though, John Mara can get out of his own way and actually do it. Moving on from 2 straight toilet bowls, gross, as we now try to lighten up the mood the Patriot way, as we talk about the New England Patriots. So with the New England Patriots, there weren't many expectations for this team as they began a completely new era in 2024. Already gone 5 years prior was Tom Brady, their winningest quarterback ever. And now, going into this past season, gone was their longtime winningest head coach in Bill Belichick. So replacing Bill Belichick was their linebackers coach, Jerod Mayo. Sure, he had plenty of experience with the team as a player, but not so much as a actual coach. He was there, I'd say, about since he retired. I think these are around 2015, 2016-ish, but correct me on that if I'm wrong. But anyway, Jerod Mayo doesn't have a lot of head coaching experience, more so of a positional coach, but not a head coach. So this would be his first head coaching job heading into this past season. In terms of the general manager role, since Bill Belichick also had that role, director of scouting Elliott Wolf also assumed that position. So the Patriots didn't spend much in free agency. Perhaps the biggest move that they made was trading away Mac Jones, the quarterback that Bill Belichick selected back in 2021. Jones got traded away to the land of all elite, to the Jaguars, and then they used the 3rd overall pick that they got in last year's draft to go and get North Carolina's Drake May. There were some nice things that I liked from Drake May, but obviously there were some concerns I had as well going into this past season and whether or not he would get the starting job over Jacoby Brissett. But either way, all these events were going to mark the true beginning and the true rebuild of the New England Patriots. But again, not a lot of expectations for this team overall going into 2024, as basically this team was just basically all about trying to convince its fan base, just give us this season to try and convince you all that there's going to be a light of hope when we eventually do make this team better. So when we look at the things that didn't go so well for this organization this past fall, yeah, it's pretty much everything I just described in terms of not a lot of expectations, because yeah, pretty much everything did go wrong for the Patriots. This team, as I mentioned in my season preview for them back in July, they were seriously flawed because this team, whether Jacoby Brissett was going to be under center or Drake May was going to be under center, it was going to make life hell for them. And it turns out I was right, because the main crux of the issue was the offensive line. Like, the offensive line was so bad all season. Like, I don't know how either quarterback survived, especially Drake May. Like, Drake May, for as tough as he is, he took a shit ton of sacks, a shit ton of hits under pressure. I don't know how he survived. Like, he got concussed at one point too during the season, and I don't know how that man survived with that crappy, I wouldn't say crappy, terrible offensive line. And then when you look at the supporting cast for the Patriots offense, other than the offensive line, the receivers were not that great either. Demario Douglas was once again the only go-to receiver. Although I would say the Hunter Henry was okay, but other than that, that's pretty much it. Defensively, they weren't that much better either. In contrast to the year prior, where they were at least trying to keep the Patriots in the game, but this year they were getting their butts whooped in nearly every game. The pass rush couldn't get to the quarterback or stop the run, and also didn't help that their best player in that unit, Christian Barmore, only played 2 games because of recurring symptoms of blood clots, which was very unfortunate. The secondary, in the passing defense, aka outside of Christian Gonzalez, they had serious troubles defending that area. And, well, all those issues just culminated to all the above, pretty much. So, looking back at the head coach, Jerod Mayo, it came pretty obvious when you got towards the end of the season that as every game started to pass, he didn't really know what he was doing. Like, he was very bad at clock management. He frequently threw players under the bus in his post-game pressers. Like, he didn't know how to properly hold players accountable. Like, they can do better at this, do better at that, so on and so forth. And that led to the players calling him out too. Like, it was like a complete, I wouldn't necessarily say dumpster fire. It's just like a complete back and forth. It was like a bad culture starting to form in New England. In contrast to when Bill Belichick was there, it's starting to become a little bit of a PR disaster, I guess. So, Gerard Mayo's coaching experience also really came to a head when, he decided to pull Lovie Smith in the season finale against the Bills. So by that point in time, when the Patriots had a great opportunity to lock up the number 1 overall pick, and potentially with that number 1 overall pick, for a QB desperate team, like let's say for the Skid Marks, the Titans, the Giants, the Raiders, get some picks to trade down. But instead, Mayo decided to pull a big FU to the organization, just like Lovie Smith did a couple years ago, and put in practice squad QB Joe Milton and beat the B squad Bills because Josh Allen didn't have anything to play for. No one else had anything to play for the Bills as they prepared for a playoff game. So Gerard Mayo knew exactly what was going to happen after the game, and decided to give the Crafts one last parting gift, a giant FU to the number 1 overall pick, and won that game. So they moved down to the 4th overall pick, and that was basically the end of Gerard Mayo in New England. So the Patriots weren't exactly good this past season, but what did go right for this team? I would say, in my opinion, Drake May. Drake May was, I'd say, pretty good. I wouldn't say great. I wouldn't say very good, but I would say, despite the horrible talent around him, he made the most of what he had. He played with a lot of grit, athleticism, mobility, and this is even despite not having a lot of college starts. He did a lot. He still did a lot of good things a coach should want in their long-term quarterback. And that's exactly what the Patriots got. Now, it'll be interesting to see how he does in year 2 with a new head coach and a new offensive coordinator, which we'll mention in a bit. But Drake May, in spite of the circumstances around him, he really did good. Again, despite of the circumstances. And then the silver lines of said horrible talent on offense were Demario Douglas and running back Antonio Gibson. Gibson was the best runner of a pretty bad rushing attack. Although, again, not saying much because, the rushing attack was bad. But he still made solid plays as both a rusher and a pass catcher. As for Douglas, we talked about him a lot, but he was, again, the only reliable receiver for Drake May. So for the Patriots, they once again ended their season at 4-13 with not a lot of bright spots compared to last year. But again, not saying much. And they did lose out on the 1st overall pick, which they could have used to, trade down to a very desperate quarterback needy team, and in return get a bunch of draft assets back. Because, again, Gerard Mayo knowing damn well what the Crafts were going to do to him, just like what the Texans were going to do to Lovie Smith a couple years ago. But despite Gerard Mayo fucking them over, the Patriots, I'd say, are still in pretty good shape with how they're going to proceed with this rebuild because of the following. A bunch of money, the 4th overall pick, and they got the head coach that they wanted all along. Former Patriots player Mike Vrabel, who is also a former head coach of the Tennessee Titans. So they already got someone who was a previous head coach and has a little bit of playoff experience, who also went to an AFC Championship game. I mean, it's not a Super Bowl, but it's something. And then he also went on to get, a familiar face at offensive coordinator, that being Josh McDaniels. So that's gonna be a big get for Drake May. So how that translates to the regular season in the several months, that remains to be seen. So now the Patriots obviously have the tall task of supplying Drake May with ample talent to take the next step of their rebuild. And boy, do they have a good amount of resources to try and make that happen. So looking at their offseason ahead, they have, by leaps and bounds, the most cap space in the NFL, the most money to spend. I'd say at this time, I think it's about $126 million once they increase the cap space. But nonetheless, it's around $126 million. Yeah, the Patriots are going to head to the bank, pal, and go and get that money. Go spending. Like I said, they had the 4th overall pick in this year's draft. Not really a whole lot of key free agents, which is good. They can pretty much say sayonara to everybody and go and get the true guys that they need to get. So the only one that they should consider re-signing is corner Jonathan Jones. So maybe they want to try to keep him around. So looking at the things that they have to address this coming offseason is, well, the main thing, the offensive line. They really have to rebuild that offensive line because this whole entire line was a big mess for that team. And for the Patriots, they should have no issue doing such unless, well, they're really that stupid to not do so. The biggest ones that they have to address, though, is the tackle spots. Because, yeah, Drake May was getting sacked. He was getting hit on the edge, like a lot. But it's an interesting point, though, like where they address it. Do they do it in free agency? Do they do it in the draft? Like, do they do it both? It'll be interesting where Elliott Wolf and Mike Vrabel do it. But regardless, they have to address the whole offensive line, especially at the tackle spot. And then you want to continue to get help for Drake May, and that continues at the receiver position because other than Demario Douglas, they don't have anything else. Maybe that 4th overall pick will come into play with that. And then on the other side of the ball, the trenches, pass rush. They need to get some help for Keon White and Christian Barmore. White was like the only defensive lineman that could constantly get to the quarterback in a year where Christian Barmore was out most of the time. So considering Mike Vrabel's experience in the front seven, maybe this is where his experience comes into play. So even if Barmore is back on a regular basis next fall, they still got to get him and Keon White some help. So yeah, the Patriots sucked even more, even if they had the same record as the season prior at 4-13. And yeah, there weren't many positives for the Patriots this past fall. But this offseason, if they do it right, they should be in good shape. They have a long-term starter in Drake May, given that if he does well next season. And they got a proven head coach in Mike Vrabel that can hopefully get New England back on track. And they got a lot of money to spend. Just as long as the New England Patriots take full advantage of all their resources. And I mean all of the boatload of them. So we take the Patriot way down to the land of all elite to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars, things didn't exactly go their way as expected in the land of all elite in 2023. And they were hoping to turn it around back this past season. So when you look at this point in time last year for the all elite Jaguars, general manager Trent Baalke handed out big fat contract extensions to the quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, and the not quarterback, Josh Allen. This is the linebacker, Josh Allen, who goes by now, I think it's Josh Hines Allen or Josh Allen Hines. We're just going to call him not quarterback Josh Allen. Okay? That's how we're going to call him here. So, other than that, some of the other notable moves that Trent Baalke made was adding the likes of Eric Armstead, familiar name for 49ers fans out there, receiver Gabe Davis, and safety Darnell Savage. So, other than that, not really much was done for the all-elite Jags, especially to help out Trevor Lawrence other than giving him another receiver. So, regardless, though, the Jaguars were hoping to bounce back and try to keep pace, try to be competitive in on paper what seemed to be like a competitive AFC South where you had the Texans and the Colts in that same division. And yeah, the Jaguars are just going to try to keep up in that division. But unfortunately for them, it didn't work out that way this past season because there were a couple things that went wrong for the Jaguars this past fall. The one big thing, one of the big things that happened for them was that defense. That defense was an overall disappointment. They signed Eric Armstead and Darnell Savage to pretty much help out those two big key areas. That was the pass rush and the back end of the defense. Those two ended up being big busts. Armstead had trouble getting to the quarterback, just like he did on the 49ers, and Savage struggled in deep coverage, and he also dealt with injuries this past year. So, yeah, those signings didn't really pay off for Trent Baalke. And then when you look at the defense as a whole, they gave up a lot of points because they struggled defending against both the pass and the run at all positions. Like, they could not stop like anything this past season. Meanwhile, you look at the offense, like Trevor Lawrence like regressed a good amount. And I get it. Like he was injured last season and he also played through injuries this season. But, you know, it also doesn't help that that he also had his own fair share of struggles. And also didn't help that he had a very bad offensive line again. But when it comes to Trevor Lawrence himself, he struggled badly with creating plays, with his receivers, reading defenses under pressure. It's like since, you know, that playoff season 2 years ago, it's like he's regressed. And he's regressed rapidly. But not helping matters, though, with Trevor Lawrence was him once again injuring his shoulder, specifically his AC joint in Philadelphia mid-season. That kept him out for a month. And when he came back, he got injured again. But not to the fault of his own, because he suffered a nasty hit from Azeez Al-Shaair from the Texans when Lawrence was trying to slide, and he got hit hard by Al-Shaair. So as a result, he got concussed very badly, and he was placed on season-ending IR, ending his season. So in essence, this was Trevor Lawrence's worst season because not just because of struggling play, but also because of another year worth of injuries. So, yeah, it was not really a good year for Lawrence. So overall, when you look at this team, it was just, when it came to Lawrence, not really good play, and then a defense that gave up a lot of points and a lot of yardage. So, did anything go right at all for the Jacksonville Jaguars? Was there anything all elite about them? Well, from the offensive side of things, Brian Thomas at receiver, he at least had a really good rookie year. This first round pick ended up being very worth it for Jacksonville. Jacksonville actually traded down with the Vikings, hoping that he would still be there at number 23, and they actually still ended up getting him. So he finished the year with over 1,200 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns, and set franchise rookie records with the Jags, and made the Pro Bowl, and for the first time, well, because he's a rookie, and he finished third in receiving yards. So I'd say he had a very successful first year, despite the injuries to Lawrence and the underwhelming play at quarterback from Mac Jones. So in general, a really good route runner and good at the point of the catch, making him the most reliable receiver, given that Gabe Davis massively disappointed and Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk were also lost at varying points of the year with injuries of their own. And then you look at the running back spot with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. I'd say they were also pretty solid, especially Tank Bigsby, who stood out more than Etienne with his power running, explosiveness, despite the poor run blocking of the offensive line. But still, these two did pretty solid early in the season when they were doing well on the ground, and they were decent receiving options for Lawrence. Bigsby probably had the most success as a runner than Etienne. It's just unfortunate that things slowed down for them due to a variety of factors, mainly the deteriorating O-line as the season wore on, and then the quarterback getting injured. So at 4-13, it was another very disappointing season for the Jaguars, but it was even worse for them given their underperformance of the whole team, as if Doug Peterson, the head coach, didn't have them ready to play in most games, and Trent Baalke's lack of investment at key positions, especially at the offensive line, it all came back to haunt them. So as a result, Peterson was fired at the end of the season, but for some reason they kept around Trent Baalke. I don't understand why. And as a result of that, the coaching search took much longer because potential candidates were turned off by Trent Baalke's mere presence. And understandably so. Like, why do you think the 49ers were one of the worst teams in the league? Like, for like 2 years before Jed York finally got rid of his butt at the end of 2016. So that finally forced Shahid Khan's hand to fire him 2 weeks later, which indicates how very poor he handled that search. But nonetheless, they finally managed to get their man in Bucs offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, albeit pretty shady by Cohen. But nonetheless, they managed to go and get their man. And currently, as we speak, it might have changed. They might have found their guy at GM. But as of right now, they're still in search for their new general manager. So regardless of who that general manager is, the Jaguars have a lot of things to patch up with. Once again, not many resources at play. So looking at their offseason ahead, the Jaguars only have about $33 million to spend. I mean, it could be worse. It could be less than $33 million. They have the 5th overall pick in this upcoming draft. For the Jags, at least they won't have too many key free agents to worry about. All they have to consider is Andre Cisco at safety and guard Brandon Sheriff. I feel like they could be replaceable. But the main things that they have to address this coming offseason is pretty much both trenches. Like Liam Cohen and whoever the next GM is, they have to address both interior trenches, because on the offensive side of the ball, the pass protection has been so bad that Trevor Lawrence has gotten hurt the past 2 seasons, while they can't do anything inside defensively. The Jaguars can use the 5th pick in this draft on either the offensive side or the defensive side of the interior lines. But if it were me, maybe picking a center or a guard can be the go-to pick with the 5th overall pick. They just have to make a decision on which one to go with. But I also spend free agency to beef up those trenches, upgrade them, because I feel like it's time. I feel like it's time to finally make that a priority. And then also on defense, they also have to go get some help for Tyson Campbell, because the Jags were once again very bad at pass coverage. And a lot of that had to do with, well, no one else to help out Tyson Campbell to defend opposing receivers. So they got to go get serious help on the other side of the ball for him, so they can at least play solid coverage defensively. And then offensively, go and get another receiver to help out Brian Thomas Jr., because other than him and Gabe Davis, if he can have a bounce back year, they don't have anything else. If they still have Christian Kirk around, then sure, but other than that, they really don't have anyone else. So they have to go get another option for Trevor Lawrence. So the Jaguars, they had some hope to compete with the Texans this past year after an injury-riddled 2023, only to have an even worse 2024. Typical all-elite Jacksonville Jaguars, huh? Pretty much comparison to AEW right now. But all jokes aside, if Shahid wants to hope his team can finally be in the division title hunt, he's got to let Liam Cohen and whoever the next general manager is, make some serious upgrades. Let them get some protection for Trevor Lawrence. Let them upgrade the defense. Let them go all in on making this team the best it can be. Because if he doesn't, well, he's just going to be like his son, Tony. Making it forever all elite, and not in the good way. So for our last team in the first part of our 2024 NFL season team recap month, we go from the land of all elite to the place that hosts WrestleMania in less than 2 months' time. We go to Sin City to talk about the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders went to this past campaign with an uneasy quarterback situation. But for whatever reason, despite all that, I thought that they would be able to keep up with some of what the AFC had to offer. Yeah, delusional ass me. This point last year, and at that point back in July when I previewed this team. What was I thinking? Like, what the heck was I thinking, huh? Clearly, I wasn't. But anyway, looking back at the offseason that was last year at this point in time, after going 5-4 as an interim head coach, replacing Josh McDaniels, who got fired in 2023, Mark Davis named Antonio Pierce the full-time head coach, while later fired. Either way, they hired former Chargers general manager Tom Telesco in the same position. So you pretty much have a new regime at hand at the time. So when you had that new regime, they really didn't do much other than address probably the most important thing they had to do at the time was the quarterback position. Unfortunately, they didn't really do all that much either because, well, they waited around, and all they ended up with was Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew of the Indianapolis Colts previously to compete with Aiden O'Connell for the starting job. So overall, when you look at this Raiders team, yeah, like I said, for whatever reason, with their defense, that was still pretty good. I thought for whatever reason they could still keep up with what the AFC had to offer with how they ended last year, the year prior in 2023 specifically. Yeah, about that. So, yeah, the moment that they settled on Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell as their quarterbacks, yeah, this past season was doomed for the Raiders. Just like how, even though there's still this particular pay-per-view, the Elimination Chamber, this WrestleMania that's gonna happen in 2 months' time in Vegas, it seems like it's doomed. So this past season for the Raiders was doomed before it even began. Sure, they started out 2-2, but then they went on to lose their next 10 games, and most of them were in humiliating fashion because, well, the quarterbacks can't do anything. They were severely limited in what they could do. Minshew particularly was a turnover machine. And then eventually he went down with the broken collarbone. There was also a brief period in time where Aiden O'Connell also was dealing with an injury. So he had to go in. I'm not sure if it was a trade or they went on to sign this guy from the practice squad of the Cardinals. But either way, they went and got Desmond Ridder from the Cardinals. I think it was like practice squad or the active roster. But either way, they had to go and get Desmond Ridder because they had no quarterbacks. They had no quarterbacks at a point in time. But Desmond Ridder couldn't provide a spark for them. So basically, by making Gardner Minshew, by making Aiden O'Connell be the quarterbacks, the Raiders were essentially reaping what they were sowing by pretty much going on with that. And in fairness, though, when I talked about that in my season preview for this team, there's basically no other options for them. But again, they could have capitalized on it much sooner. I don't know why they were waiting so long on, making a decision at that most important point of the game. The other thing that went wrong for this team was for the trade for Davante Adams. Now, granted, Davante Adams did injure his hamstring before that game in Week 4 against the Browns. He wanted to miss the next 2 games, but he also was already wanting out of there anyway. So when he did get out to go to the New York Jets, he got traded. The Raiders, there's basically no passing game. You already had shitty quarterbacks, but then now you complement that with no pass catching help other than the rookie Brock Bowers. Yeah, this offense was basically non-existent. the fact that they were able to win like the games that they did later on in the season, that was a surprise to me. Speaking of those games that they managed to win, they, for whatever reason, decided to win 2 useless games before their Week 18 finale. Like why? Like, they were in prime position to go and get the number 1 overall pick. Very much like the other teams that we talked about in this season, this part of the season recap month. They were in pole position to go and get the number 1 overall pick. They were like, out of all the teams that we talked about, they were probably, like, I'd say it's either them or the Giants that were in most need of a quarterback. And yet, for whatever reason, I get it, though, in fairness, the Jags and the Saints were also just as bad as at that point in time. But for whatever reason, Antonio Pierce and the players, they were too prideful. They pulled a "that's not going to work for me, brother," to just not suck for just 3 more games. And they want to win just 1, baby. They thought not losing 3 more games was going to work for them, brother. And then they won 1 against the Jaguars. And 1 win became 2 over the Saints. So, like, what exactly does that do? Sure, it increases their confidence levels, but then it affects them in the long term. By doing that, they fucked themselves over out of the top overall pick of this draft. Not just out of the top pick, out of the top 5 of this draft. Like, they were in great position of the top overall pick. And again, they're out of the top 5 of this draft. So, like, they screwed themselves. They screwed themselves out of getting a quarterback. And if they want to get a quarterback, they either got to trade up or hope for a miracle in free agency. It's like, this team can't even get that right. Like, seriously. So, again, don't want to be too negative about any of these teams that were really bad this season, because there has to be at least a silver lining with all these teams that did poorly. And as is the case with all these bad teams, there was at least one. And with the Raiders, it was Brock Bowers. Now, many people question the decision to go and get him when they already picked a tight end the year prior. But in my opinion, this ended up being the right pick at, I believe he was number 13 overall when they made this pick. But nonetheless, getting Brock Bowers when they did in the first round of last year's draft, very good pick by the Raiders. I'll give them that. Even in a crappy offense, Brock Bowers was by default the clear top receiving option because, well, they had no one else. They had no one else. Brock Bowers had probably a really good rookie season. No, not probably. He had a great rookie season. Led the team in all categories, broke a bunch of NFL records, named a first team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler all in his rookie year. Yeah, not bad for a rookie on a shitty team like the Raiders. So, for this Raiders team that went 4-13, yeah, they were a very bad team. Not just a very bad team, they were a terrible team. That I, like I said, like 3 times now, for some reason, thought they were in solid shape going into this past year. However, I'm willing to admit that I can take everything back I said in my season preview last year in July when I talked about this team. I take everything back I said. Yeah, this team sucked in the year of 2024. Antonio Pierce was in over his head as the full-time head coach, even if his players rallied around him in the end. So, guess what? He was one and done out of Vegas by Mark Davis. And so was Tom Telesco, the GM. So that called for a clean slate in Las Vegas. So Mark Davis conducted this long coaching GM search that even had new minority owner, Tom Brady, involved. Yes, Tom Brady. So anyway, Mark Davis ends up going with Brady's former front office teammate, John Spytek, weird last name, as general manager, and former Seahawks head coach, Pete Carroll. So he goes up with that duo. The coaching choice was interesting. to say the least, given Carroll is on the older side and he hasn't been a head coach for, I'd say 2021 or when was it 2021 or 2023 when Seahawks moved him to an advisory role. I don't know. But either way, at least with Pete Carroll, yeah, he's on the older side, but at least brings some winning experience when he was in Seattle. So Carroll and Spytek, they now have this large duty of trying to hopefully rebuild this team properly, given that Mark Davis, lets them. So the Raiders at least have a lot of resources at hand. They have about $95 million in cap space, so they got a lot of money to spend. They have the second most behind the Patriots. They also have the 6th overall pick. So again, that's the consequence of winning those 2 useless games. Yes, in fairness, the Jaguars and the Saints were very bad last year. But yeah, he still had to outsuck them, but they, for whatever reason, they pulled that's not going to work for me, brother. But anyway, here they are now. You can't do anything about it. So some of the key free agents that have to consider re-signing, and they could certainly do so with all that money, is safety Marcus Epps, linebackers Marcus Spillane and Divine Diablo, which I think are 2 priorities, and corner Nate Hobbs, which is also a priority. So definitely some decisions that need to be had. And I think 2 of those guys are must re-signs for them. But before any of that can be considered, some of the needs that must be addressed for the Raiders this coming off season is obviously the quarterback position. But like I said, just like with the Giants, they stupidly won 2 games at the end of the year to get out of position for not just the top pick, but a top 5 pick. So unless a prospect flies up the board during the combine or pro days in the lead up of this draft, I think the Raiders, they're going to have to take either a short-term free agent fill-in or try to take a flyer in round 2 if they find something in this draft that's worth a round 2 pick. So, yeah, the Raiders, they fucked themselves with this one. I don't know what quarterback they're going to get this offseason. They're also going to need 2 top receivers because once they decide on the quarterback, they're going to have to get him some help. That starts at the wide receiver spot because all they have is Jacoby Myers, even if he's decent as a number 2. And they also have Brock Bowers, their top tight end. But you can't go into this coming season in several months having just those 2. Got to get more help. And then, like I said, you got to re-sign Nate Hobbs. You got to re-sign Marcus Spillane and Divine Diablo. Specifically with Nate Hobbs' position, he doesn't have really much help at that cornerback group. So they have to go and replenish it. And then at the linebacker spot, there's not really much depth behind their position with Spillane and Diablo. Got to get them some help. So the Raiders, they're in a pretty rough spot because they have a lot of holes on their roster that, for whatever reason, like I said, this is pretty much the theme of their recap. I thought they would be fine this past year. But here they are now. They were 4-13 the end of the year. They're in a kind of rough spot because, well, they're not in a position to go and get a good quarterback. But they still have to address it nonetheless because Pete Carroll can't go into his first year coaching this team with Aiden O'Connell. So what do they do? Like, where do they turn without a top 5 draft pick? And, like, what's the best option in free agency? Only they can figure that out. But, I mean, hey, you're getting a WrestleMania in 2 months. But even then, it's like, even that feels screwy. But for the Raiders, this coming off season, they have to figure out fast on which quarterback is going to lead this team going to next fall under this new tandem of Pete Carroll and John Spytek. And they got to figure that out fast. That's a wrap on this part of our 2024 NFL season team recap month, the Disastrous Six, as we always kick off our annual recap month. And the Disastrous Six that we talked about in this episode is the Las Vegas Raiders, the Jaguars, the Giants, the Titans, the Browns, and the Patriots. So let me know if you're a fan of these teams. Let me know what they need to do to get back on track, hopefully, in next season, 2025. Or if you don't think that they're going to get back on track, let me know why. Let's have a conversation about all these teams, whether you're a fan of them or not, and what they need to do, like the top priority for any of these teams to hopefully at least have a much more decent season this coming fall in several months' time. So, yeah, we'll be moving on to part 2. We'll move on to the next 6 teams in the next episode. And, yeah, we'll be on our way to the next batch and the next batch and the next batch. But, yeah, this was part 1 of our 2024 NFL season recap month. All wrapped up. And until we get to part 2, thank you for tuning into this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. This is episode number 254 of this icy yet spicy podcast. And until the next one, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And yeah, thank you for tuning in to part 1 of our 2024 season recap month that has kicked off. And until I see you in the next part and in the next episode, peace out.